From empire to chimerica, financial crises, global power, and the rebalancing of the world economy. In the early years of the 21st century, observers of the global economy began to notice a profound shift. For much of the 20th century, financial crises tended to erupt in emerging markets. Latin America suffered repeated currency collapses. Asia experienced a devastating financial crisis in the late 1990s. Russia defaulted on its debt. Developing countries were widely seen as fragile, prone to instability, and vulnerable to sudden reversals of investor confidence. But something changed as the new millennium began. The first major crisis of the 21st century did not originate in an emerging economy. It came from the heart of the developed world, from the United States itself, with the bursting of the dot-com bubble in 2000. This collapse wiped out trillions of dollars in paper wealth, exposed speculative excesses, and revealed weaknesses within the American financial system that many had ignored. And while markets recovered for a time, the deeper structural issues did not disappear. They re-emerged dramatically in 2007 with the onset of the subprime mortgage crisis, which expanded into the global financial crisis of 2008. Initially, many analysts predicted that the shockwaves would devastate economies around the world, especially in Asia. For decades, it was assumed that if the United States sneezed, the rest of the world would catch a cold. Yet something surprising happened. While the American and European financial systems entered a period of severe distress, countries like China, India, and many in Southeast Asia demonstrated remarkable resilience. Their growth slowed but did not collapse. Their financial institutions appeared more stable. Their foreign exchange reserves were stronger. Their governments reacted quickly with stimulus programs that kept economic activity alive. This unexpected divergence led some economists to propose the idea of decoupling, the possibility that emerging markets were no longer strictly dependent on the economic cycles of the United States. Although the world remained interconnected, it became clear that the balance of power was shifting. This shift reflected a deeper transformation already underway. China, once considered a peripheral player in the global economy, had become a central driver of global growth. Its rapid industrialization, enormous population, and expanding technological capacity positioned it as a future superpower. Many analysts began forecasting that China could surpass the United States in total economic output far sooner than previously imagined. Some predicted 2040, others moved the estimate to 2030, and several argued that parity could arrive even earlier, especially when measured in purchasing power terms. The economic relationship between China and the United States grew so intertwined that analysts coined a new term to describe it. They called it chimerica. This concept captured the extraordinary synergy between American consumption and Chinese production. The United States borrowed and spent while China saved and manufactured. American consumers purchased vast quantities of imported goods, and China accumulated massive holdings of U.S. Treasury bonds. It was a partnership that fueled global growth but also created imbalances that carried risks for both nations. To understand how this new relationship emerged, it helps to step back and look at the longer arc of economic history. For much of recorded history, the global economy was relatively balanced. For centuries, China and India accounted for a large share of the world's population and economic output. Their agricultural systems were sophisticated. Their urban centers were advanced. Their technologies were competitive with those of Europe. Economic parity between East and West was the norm rather than the exception. But beginning in the 18th century, a dramatic divergence occurred. Europe, and then North America, experienced the Industrial Revolution. This transformation introduced mechanized production, steam power, railways, mechanized agriculture, and eventually electricity and mass manufacturing. Productivity increased at rates never seen before. Living standards rose. Corporations expanded. A new global trade system emerged centered on Western industrial production. By contrast, major Asian powers faced internal challenges, political instability, and foreign intervention that slowed their ability to industrialize at a similar pace. China's Qing dynasty struggled with corruption, rebellion, and imperial pressure from Western powers. India became part of the British Empire and its economic structure shifted toward the needs of the imperial system. The result was an enormous gap. By the mid-20th century, the disparity had grown to staggering proportions. The average American earned many times more than the average Chinese citizen. The United States had become the world's dominant industrial and financial power, while China, emerging from decades of war and political upheaval, remained overwhelmingly rural and impoverished. Yet history never moves in one direction forever. After 1978, China launched a series of economic reforms that unleashed its productive potential. The country opened to foreign investment, encouraged entrepreneurship, and built special economic zones that attracted global manufacturing. Millions moved from farms to cities. Education expanded. Infrastructure grew at unprecedented speed. International corporations shifted production to Chinese factories, drawn by competitive labor costs and improving technology. By the early 21st century, China had become the workshop of the world, while the United States increasingly relied on imported goods and foreign financing. The long historical divergence began to narrow. At the same time, globalization intensified. Although many people associate globalization with the late 20th century, the concept is not new. Before the First World War, the world economy was remarkably integrated. Between the mid-19th century and 1914, capital flowed freely from wealthier nations like Britain, France, and the United States to developing regions such as Latin America, Eastern Europe, and parts of Asia. Investors financed railways in Argentina, mines in South Africa, and plantations in Southeast Asia. Global trade expanded rapidly, and labor migration reached enormous levels. This first era of globalization created high expectations. Many believed global capital would uplift poor countries and stimulate sustained development. But these investments often faltered. Political instability, corruption, unfair trade arrangements, and exploitative colonial practices limited the long-term benefits. Many developing regions found themselves burdened with debt rather than prosperity. The optimism of early globalization eventually gave way to disappointment, and the First World War shattered the integrated global system. When globalization revived in the late 20th century, it unfolded in a world shaped by new institutions, technologies, and power dynamics. Modern supply chains allowed corporations to distribute production across continents. Financial markets became deeply interconnected. A crisis in one country could spread across the globe within days. But unlike the earlier era, this wave of globalization was dominated by powerful Western economies. American and European financial institutions controlled most of the world's capital flows. International organizations emphasized market liberalization, privatization, and fiscal discipline, often pressuring developing countries to adopt policies that aligned with Western economic interests. While some nations benefited greatly, others struggled to achieve meaningful growth. The rise of China added a new dimension to this global landscape. China did not follow the standard Western model. It maintained strong state involvement in key industries, carefully regulated its financial system, and strategically planned its long-term development. This alternative approach challenged long-standing assumptions about the relationship between markets and government. China's success encouraged other developing nations to explore hybrid models that blended state guidance with private sector dynamism. Meanwhile, the financial crises of the early 21st century revealed weaknesses in Western economic structures, including excessive leverage, under-regulated capital markets, and growing inequality. As the United States and China became more interdependent, analysts began describing their relationship as symbiotic but fragile. The United States depended on Chinese manufacturing to keep consumer prices low. China depended on American demand to drive its exports and on American financial markets to store its vast foreign exchange reserves. This arrangement benefited both sides, but it also introduced vulnerabilities. If American consumers reduced spending, Chinese factories could slow down. If China stopped purchasing U.S. debt, American interest rates could rise. Each nation held leverage over the other, creating a delicate balance. Beyond these financial ties, deeper geopolitical questions emerged. Would China eventually challenge American global leadership? The United States had shaped the international order since the end of the Second World War, building institutions like the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. China, however, began establishing new institutions of its own, such as the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the Belt and Road Initiative. These projects aimed to strengthen China's global influence by financing infrastructure, trade routes, and energy projects across Asia, Africa, and Europe. As global power began to redistribute, the world faced new uncertainties. Developed economies confronted aging populations, slowing productivity, and rising debt. Emerging economies wrestled with environmental pressures, political tensions, and the challenges of sustaining rapid growth. Financial markets became more volatile. Technology disrupted industries. Digital currencies and artificial intelligence emerged as new frontiers. Meanwhile, climate change introduced risks that threatened not just markets but entire societies. In this complex landscape, the old narrative of Western dominance and Eastern underdevelopment no longer applied. The 21st century was becoming a multipolar era in which no single country held uncontested economic authority. Instead, power was shared, contested, and constantly shifting. The story of Chimerica offered a lens through which to understand this transition. It showed how deeply the destinies of nations could intertwine, how cooperation and competition could coexist, and how the global economy could transform in ways that defied earlier predictions. From empire to Chimerica, the evolution of financial relations between East and West reflects the ongoing rebalancing of global power. It is a story shaped by crises, innovations, historical legacies, and human ambition. And as new challenges arise, the future of the world economy will be shaped not by one nation alone but by the dynamic interplay of many. The lessons of the past offer guidance, but the path ahead remains open and full of possibility.